I'm here today with the internationally renowned conductor Lidiya Yankovskaya. Lidiya grew up in St. Petersburg, Russia, and came to the United States as a refugee at the age of 9. She studied at Vassar College and then at Boston University. While in Boston, Lidiya founded the Refugee Orchestra Project and led the Juventus New Music Ensemble, as well as opera projects at Harvard. Since then, she has won many awards and enthusiastic press reviews for her performances around the world with the London Philharmonic Orchestra, Opera Australia, Atlanta Symphony, the Hamburg State Opera, Houston Grand Opera, and the Chicago Opera Theater, to name just a few. And just a few years ago, she moved with her husband and children to England. During the 2009-2010 season, Lidiya was a conducting intern with the Zamir Chorale of Boston, and that's a program we've been providing for the past 26 years. 31 conducting interns have sung in Zamir Chorale and, in lessons with me, have studied conducting and learned about the best of Jewish music. Lidiya, thank you for taking the time from your busy schedule. I know you've done lots of media interviews. I'd like to focus mostly on your brief time with Zamir and what of that might have stayed with you. But first, when and how did you know you wanted to become a conductor?
Oh, great question. I started conducting very young, actually. I was a pianist and violinist, and I grew up singing in choirs. I was in a very intensive children's chorus when I was a small child. And I won a concerto competition as a high school student with my high school orchestra, in which I played violin. But I won the competition on the piano with a Mozart piano concerto. And the conductor encouraged me to lead rehearsals from the piano because, of course, during Mozart's time, there would not have been a conductor. And he thought of it as a good exercise, both for myself and for the orchestra. And I think I also probably had way too many ideas to offer. And he just said, "Here, you lead it from the piano." And he saw that it came naturally to me. And I had never really considered conducting even as an option.
Hmm.
And he said, "Would you like to conduct something at our next concert?" And so when I was 17, I conducted the third movement of Dvorak's Seventh Symphony in performance. And the important thing, of course, is also that he gave me time, enough rehearsal time. He taught me some conducting. I did not want to become a concert pianist. The idea of just spending time alone in practice rooms or traveling around in that way was not appealing to me. And I ended up studying, going to Vassar to study philosophy and music and languages and many things. But I was able to continue conducting there, and I ended up ultimately pursuing it as a profession. And conducting allowed me to combine my various instruments, my work as a pianist and a violinist. I could keep playing even as part of my work. My love for languages through opera and in general, through
Mhm.
even through the orchestral work, and also my love for theory and musicology and composition. All of that was encompassed in conducting.
Let's go back a little further. You grew up in St. Petersburg. That was the home of the so-called St. Petersburg School of Jewish Composers, who had studied at the St. Petersburg Conservatory with Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov, and they founded the St. Petersburg Society for Jewish Music just over 100 years ago. When you were a child, was any of that music still being played or taught in St. Petersburg?
A lot of the great music by Jewish composers throughout the ages is not heard as prominently as it should be. And for me, that was one of the most meaningful things about being part of Zamir and studying with you. And I wish I could have done it even for longer because there's just so much repertoire. It's endless, but there is so much amazing work, some of which gets done fairly regularly. Let's take something like the Block Sacred Service, which I love, and which is one of the more performed Jewish works, but is still done so rarely compared to some of the famous requiems, for instance,
Sure.
despite the fact that quality wise it is better than many of the works that get done regularly. But it's so much harder even now as a conductor. I'm constantly in the position of programming things, and there's some
Right.
pieces like that one that I'd love to do all the time, but that are hard to push through and program, especially if it's not associated with some specialty time of year or holiday or
Right.
remembrance, or you name it. Yeah.
It's not a token Hanukkah piece or something like
Yes.
that. But yeah, people aren't aware of it, and that music is generally not taught in the choral literature courses for conductors. You grew up Jewish in Russia. What how important was Judaism? How much were you aware of it, and did you experience any discrimination?
Yeah, when I was a kid in Russia, Judaism was an ethnicity, more than any other kind of identity. Of course, like everywhere else, there was a cultural and religious identity rolled in, but most people were not practicing religiously in any faith,
Mhm.
whether Jews or otherwise. People's passports under nationality even listed Jewish as your nationality as opposed to Russian.
Mm.
And that was if either of your parents was Jewish, actually, in many cases. And so it was very tied into people's identities as a racial designation, I would say,
Yeah.
or a national designation, because those terms are also so filled with so much misunderstanding in so many different contexts. But I that was the main context. And of course, even when I was a kid, there were obviously Jewish quotas in certain parts of society still, especially in
Uh-huh.
educational institutions, that you would routinely hear anti-Semitic remarks and things like, "Oh, those Jews, but you're not like them. You're the good one," and the stereotypes that
Yeah.
happen whenever you have people divided by national lines or identities, or ethnic, I should rather say ethnic lines and identities. And when also during Reconstruction, which is when I was growing up, when the Soviet Union was falling apart, or was, and Russia was in this state of complete flux, and it was unclear what was happening next. Whenever there's political and economic turmoil, people need somebody to blame. And we know this from history, that whenever there is a large enough minority present, that minority ends up being a scapegoat. And in St. Petersburg, the statistics vary, but they say it was about 30% Jewish at that time. Most people left quickly in the 90s and into the 2000s, so that changed. But of course, the Jewish community, many of people from which were quite prominent in various fields, ended up being the scapegoat. Just as it was during after the revolution and during Stalinist times, and so again in the 90s. And so you would see demonstrations on the streets with people handing out anti-Semitic pamphlets, blaming Jews for all of the problems of society. As again, unfortunately, we see in history again and again whenever there is any large minority in a region.
So you're at Boston University studying conducting. What brought you to Zamir? How did you hear about us, and what made you decide to stay with us?
Well, I heard about Zamir from my advisor at Boston University, Ann Howard Jones. And Dr. Ann Howard Jones learned that I was Jewish and immediately said, "Oh, you should go to Zamir
Oh, nice.
because you might be interested in this." Of course, I should say that I think any student of any background would benefit from that fellowship, no matter whether they are themselves Jewish. But she's the one who told me about this fellowship with Zamir and sent me your way, and I was so thankful for that.
So you were with us for a couple of years in Zamir. Love to hear about what you learned and what of that might have stayed with you.
When we are young in the United States and we learn about Jewish culture, and once my family moved to the US, I went to a Hebrew day school for a short while. And then, of course, did all of the usual, was really involved in USY and did went to Hebrew school and did kind of the usual things. I went to Jewish camps my entire childhood. And as part of that, you learn about Jewish cultural history or some aspects of it. But actually, when it comes to music in particular, it's almost entirely contemporary Israeli music. But we were more likely to sing music from Rent, which has nothing to do with anything. Or again, a lot of contemporary popular Israeli music specifically than music from this rich, long Jewish history. I think for me, coming to all this repertoire was really fascinating because also in the choral world in particular, so many people come to choral music through their experiences in church, because churches in the United States, in many different faiths, often have such strong choral programs within the churches. So kids grow up singing in the church and singing the music that liturgically goes with whatever. But I think in some ways, because so many choral conductors or pedagogues come from the church themselves, they also don't have as much exposure to a wide range of music, and not just Jewish music, but there's choral music from all over the world. That's really fascinating, from different cultures.
So, the second half of my question, how much of this has stayed with you? Are you able to perform any of this music or talk about it, teach it?
I think the talking about it is a huge part, and knowing about these composers and being able to bring them up and mention them, even casually in an interview, may make a difference and may spark somebody's interest. So often it's just mentioning the piece enough times and talking about it casually that becomes important, because if the right board member, let's say, who on a symphonic organization, who may be really interested in some of this music but may not know about Block, for instance, it may be possible to program a piece, or sometimes maybe you can't get it on a certain program or a certain year, but you can the following year, and you say it enough times and people think that they knew about the composer all along, because that's how it works, unfortunately, with humans.
Lidiya, when you were in Zamir, you performed one of our most memorable duets, an adaptation of a Yiddish theater song in which a young woman falls in love with a klezmer violinist. You, you were spectacular as the soprano soloist, and your partner was none other than the world famous violinist Dan Stepner. I hope you remember that because it was wonderful.
It is still my most watched YouTube video, is my singing "Oi Mama bin ich verliebt."
Exactly.
Yeah, it was great. That was a great experience. It was great fun.
And to be able to work with Dan Stepner also on that. Yeah.
Yeah, he was fantastic. And he was such a good sport about it. It was really great.
I mean, you're such an amazing soprano. Do you still have time to sing?
I wish I still had more time to sing. It does come in very handy in my work, though. However, for instance, just in the Saslo Onegin, which was one of my most recent projects, our baritone singing the title role got very sick, and we didn't have a cover. And for the Sitzprobe and both dress rehearsals, I had to sing the whole role.
The baritone role.
Yeah, the baritone role. And the first day they just kind of handed me like a microphone to sing it into for the whole time. It was more in the way than anything else. So I sang the whole baritone role an octave up. And I never sing really anymore. I was convinced that I would lose my voice after this, but I'm thankful to Sharon Daniels, who was my voice teacher in grad school, who gave me great technique despite my not practicing voice very much at that time.
How was the transition for you from choral conducting to orchestral conducting?
The main difference is actually choral conducting is much more personal. Your interaction in general, working with singers, it's the same thing with opera as well in many ways. But I think because people are using their bodies to create the sound, your relationship with the people in front of you is much more personal, and it's much more dependent on who those people are. It is with an orchestra as well. Of course, each orchestra has a different sound. Each player is a little bit different. But with a choral ensemble, it's literally the sound is also what the people can make, and you can shape the sound in many ways, and you can build it and you can do things with it, but ultimately the humans and the bodies that you have in front of you, and that includes the psychological part of it, are the people you have in front of you, and you're working with them much more intimately to create this sound, and the relationship between the singers, also having been both a choral singer and an instrumentalist, the relationship between people singing together is much, much more intimate than the relationship between two violinists sitting next to each other.
Lidiya, I think part of the crux of that is that choral singers sing from a score.
Mm-hmm.
They see what their fellow singers are singing,
Yeah,
and the instrumentalists only look at their own part. And
their
I
own
think
part.
that makes a big difference in the
I
in the
think that
culture.
does. I think home, but it's also something about sharing breath and body, and it's intangible. But I think when you're doing that with other people and even standing closer to each other, even that makes the
Yeah.
difference. That the relationship between the people psychologically, the way they feel things together, becomes much, much more important, I
Especially in a community chorus or any chorus that we would call a non-professional.
think.
I use the word amateur in the best sense because they're there because they love it,
Yeah.
not to make money. And they are so, I mean, that's been my experience with Zamir and with college choirs. They're just so dedicated to what they're doing.
Oh, incredibly so. And the level of personal responsibility and preparation and excitement about being there,
Yeah.
that's the wonderful thing about especially amateur choruses. Because what makes them amateur is that the people don't have to be there. They choose to be there every single moment and every single day. And that's often the case, but not always the case with professional musicians.
And that's your challenge as a conductor to make sure that they want to come back. And Lidiya, I have found, especially in the last year or so, when when life can be so dark, people really look forward to rehearsals as a way of bringing some light and harmony in both metaphorical and literal sense into their lives. So
Yeah.
you moved to the UK. Are you in London?
Yes, I'm in London right now. Yeah.
You're, I might ask you why and how is it going? What's the difference culturally, musical scene, friends, etc.?
I mean, I'll start with the musical part because the music making in London is incredible. I think it's perhaps the best in the world. Um, there are just so many amazing musicians here on such a high level. There's so many orchestras and opera organizations and all kinds of performances. The musical education is really good here, exceptionally good. And I think that also feeds into everything else. And of course, the Brits complain about not enough arts funding, and that's true, and they can use more. But in reality, compared to the United States, certainly there's so much, not just funding, but also support for the arts, not from just people giving money, but people coming to performances.
Mm.
I've had the experience of with the London Philharmonic performing obscure repertoire that I think, oh, who's going to show up to this? And a week out, Royal Albert Hall, which is this huge venue, is completely sold out.
Wonderful. So you've traveled around the world a lot. You worked in many different languages with many different musicians. Talk about the different cultures and experiences that you've had.
Because what I see now more and more in the world, actually more recently, is on the one hand, we've become more interconnected, of course, through the internet, through everything, through what you and I are doing now. But also we've become more and more siloed. And that I think is really unfortunate because no matter where you are, you have all kinds of people. And I think this is the beautiful thing about music, actually, especially choral music, is that it allows different kinds of people to connect, to come together, to sing as one voice, literally, to unite. And that's a really special thing that we can't get enough of, I think, in the world.
Beautifully put. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about yourself, your time with Zamir, your
No, only that it was a really special and really joyous time. I was, of course, the intern, and then I stayed with the organization for a couple more years because I just loved singing with that group of people who were all just so dedicated to the music making and so dedicated to the art and to each other, and that was really special. And I learned so much from the experience also. because I think you also fostered an environment where you gave me so many opportunities to really conduct and do things and work with the group, but also to engage in open dialogue and to get feedback from them and from you and to learn from this experience. And of course, all of the music and all of the composers that we studied who are so important. And there's so much spectacular, spectacular work and work that I keep coming back to. But in general, I still have all of those resources, and I do come back to them regularly because it's just such beautiful music and music that I enjoyed performing so much.
Lidiya, thank you for taking the time to talk with us and share these sentiments and beautiful stories of your career. And wish you all the best. And hopefully, we'll connect again in person sometime soon.
Thank you, Josh. And thank you also for all you do and have done and continue to do for Jewish music. In 100 or 200 years, somebody is going to look back on essentially the archive that you've created of Jewish music, be it recordings with Zamir or works that you've published or all of the things that you've done. And it's going to be an absolutely and continue to be a critical resource for people when they look at the history of Jewish music and what it is, because there isn't enough out there. And I think you've also done it in so many different kinds of ways through your academic work, but also through mentorship, through the publication, through performance. And those tend to not coincide as much as performers. As performers, we often don't have enough connection to the research worlds and those parts of it.
Mm.
So thank you for all you do and have done and continue to do. I think it's really important.
Wenn zerspielt sich auf sein Fiedel, schön hört sich jede Schliedel. Oi, Mama, wird mir geht ohne Schild. Mit seine schöne schwarze Augen hat dann mir zugezogen. In